All right, it's time to take a step back and to think a little more broadly about what research is and how it's done. This video is going to be a pretty short one, but it's going to be a really important one. It's all about what the research process is. I'm going to take you kind of from the very beginning of the process through all the various steps that you're going to need to do to pull off a historical research project. In a way, this is kind of a snapshot or a sort of coming attractions, trailer of what we're going to do in this course. I'm going to go through in sort of really brief chunks what the various things that we're going to learn throughout the semester and what you're going to inevitably have to do for your research projects. And let me just say, it might be worthwhile to kind of come back and watch this video again later on down the semester when you've gotten into the kind of thick of things and you want a reminder about the whole process. And if this is you watching for the second or third or fourth time, hi again, and welcome back. And I hope you enjoy this video as much the third time as you did the first. All right, let's get going. Okay, we're going to tackle this in kind of two main parts. In the first part, I want to take you through the research process and sort of sketch out what the whole process looks like. Then in the second part, I'm going to give you kind of my tips for this stage of the process, for the very beginning of the process. What are some things you should be thinking about right now and doing right now to prepare yourself to undertake this whole research process? Okay, let's start with what the process is. All right, you may remember this graphic from a previous video. This represents the entirety of the research process. All research begins with the conceptualization of the project and then proceeds to finding resources and materials to use. Researchers then read those sources and analyze them, much like scientists arranging their experiments and then running those experiments. Finally, researchers use the analysis to create some piece of research, a paper or a poster or a presentation. That's research in a nutshell. And to be honest, this is the process that you use to solve really any problem. I mean, when you go out into the world, in whatever occupation you so choose, you'll use the same basic process to solve problems in your jobs. You'll set up a study, you'll find evidence, you'll read that evidence and analyze it for the relevance to the original question, and then use that analysis to create some sort of deliverable, whether it be a presentation to your team or to your bosses, or a memo or a white paper, or whatever it is you end up doing. In the world of historical research, however, it's a bit more complicated. Rather, there are more specific manifestations of each of these stages. So let's kind of take a look at all of the stages together and what this looks like in a historical research process. So first, when we say conceptualize in a historical research project, we mean a few things. First, historians have to identify a topic, and that topic has to be historical. From there, historians then ask a question about that topic, and the question has to be a complex question that demands some sort of argument. It can't be a simple sort of what or when question, like, when did the storming of the Bastille happen? Instead, historians ask how and why questions in order to induce more complex analyses. Finally, historians posit hypotheses. These hypotheses help guide their research and what they should pay attention to as they go along reading their sources. When we say find, what historians mean is really finding two different types of sources. First, historians will find secondary sources that contribute to a historiographical debate. This will end up being the debate that your paper will speak into. Historians also find primary sources that will serve as the evidence to be tested and examined in relation to their hypotheses. Of course, historians also read their sources, but they read different types of sources in different ways. With secondary sources, they read for argument. They seek to determine what other historians have said about their topic and in relation to each other, right? They read for what those arguments are and how they relate. With primary sources, they read for information and for evidence relevant to their hypothesis. They also read for perspective to see that they're getting as diverse a set of opinions and perspectives as possible. When we say analysis, that also takes kind of two general forms. Analyses of secondary sources are really analyses of historiographical debates. Historians summarize what other historians have said in order to show how what they are saying with their research is significant and meaningful. Historians also analyze primary sources by finding within them pieces of evidence that will substantiate the claims that they want to make. In other words, evidence that they can build an argument upon. And finally, what do historians do with their analyses? Well, generally, they write. They write some sort of research paper, whether it be a journal article or an essay or even maybe a long-form book. But most historians also present research orally, usually in conference presentations or poster presentations or even maybe digital presentations. In other words, historians do things with their research and share it with others so that others can encounter it and use it and build upon it. Another way to think of historical research is to think through the process via the sources that historians consult. Historians generally begin their research with tertiary sources. Tertiary sources help them conceptualize their topics and the questions that they're going to ask about those topics. Tertiary sources also help historians find secondary and primary sources that will be relevant for their study. Historians use secondary sources to determine historiographical debates, to set up context, and to determine a methodology that they will use in their own research. It's impossible to know what you can add to the historiography of a topic without examining that historiography and what's missing from it. Finally, historians examine primary sources that match with their research methodologies and that provide multiple perspectives and vantage points on the topic that they're interested in. Primary sources are the evidence that historians use to support their arguments. So the process moves from kind of tertiary sources to secondary sources to primary sources, just as it moves from conceptualizing to finding to reading and analyzing and then using. So too, the writing process has different stages. For research projects, historians always begin with pre-writing. They sketch out brainstorms and ideas in notebooks or note files. They compile their sources and list them in bibliographies. Eventually, once they've read their sources, they outline their papers and their arguments. When they write, they do so in sections, each of which have different purposes. Generally, historians begin with historiography. They write a section of that paper or project that analyzes what other historians have said first. Then they move on to what they're adding themselves. This takes the form of kind of argumentative sections. Many historians finish the writing process with the beginning and the ends of their papers, the introductions and the conclusions. This is because both sections encapsulate the argument in its entirety, and thus it really can't be finished until the argument as a whole has been figured out. Finally, with all good research writing comes a process of revision. As this lovely cat maintains, most good writing starts as bad writing. Historians and all scholars draft papers. They run them by colleagues and friends and even peer reviewers to get feedback. And then they go back and change things. Editing and revising is a key part of the research process. You rarely figure things out the first time you write them on paper. It's only through the process of revision that really good research emerges. Okay, so that's the research process. That's essentially what you're going to do for the rest of the semester. It may seem kind of simple. Hopefully, it seems manageable. But it's complicated, and we'll spend most of the rest of the semester sort of digging more deeply into all of these concepts that I brought up, all of the various stages of the research process that I talked about. So now let me leave you with some tips, some things to think about at this moment, at the beginning of the process, things you can do that are going to help you out throughout the rest of the semester. All right, I'm going to have tons of tips along the way as we talk through the research process, but let me just start by giving you a few that I think will be important for you to know at the very beginning of this process. First, take a moment to set up deadlines for yourself that correspond with each of the parts of the research process. That'll help you stay on schedule and not find yourself 2 weeks before the deadline still searching for sources, which would be very, very bad. Second, order materials right away when you find them. We'll talk about how to find sources in a few weeks, but when we get to that stage, make sure not to delay on actually ordering the things that you find. I'll take you through how to do that later on. Just know that the find process should happen quickly. Sometimes it takes weeks to get materials in, so when you find things, order them immediately. That way you'll have them in time. Third, talk with others. Work with them throughout the process. It's so easy to kind of get in the weeds with your research. You'll start to lose sight of the, 30,000-foot view. Talking to others helps. They'll help you think through what to do, if your ideas make sense, if your writing communicates those ideas clearly. Find a buddy, make a friend. Share in the process together. Finally, decide upon a system for organizing your research. Let me show you what my favorite is. This is the website for Zotero. Zotero is a piece of software that I absolutely love. I think it is the best software out there to organize your research materials. Zotero is completely and utterly free. It's ad-free as well. It was developed by essentially academics and researchers at George Mason University and I think a few other universities as well. So this is a totally free piece of software that you can download and use. To download it, it's pretty simple. Go to their website and click download. Now, the thing to kind of notice is that you're going to want to download two different things. First, you're going to want to download the actual software, the program itself that will be on your computer. But second, you're going to want to also download the connector to whatever plugin, whatever internet browser you use, whether it be Chrome or anything else. The reason is because Zotero works really well with library catalogs, and I'll show you what I mean in just a second. First, let me take you to what Zotero looks like on your computer. This is what Zotero looks like. This is kind of the main window, the main screen. Zotero is just a database program. It allows you to kind of create and index your sources and organize them however you want. Here's a look at my library in full. I have lots and lots of sources, as you can see, but each one of these is a book or an article or a primary source or something along those lines. You can kind of tell by the icons there what different types of materials these are. What I tend to do with my Zotero library is I tend to set up folders. And I'll set up a folder for every single research project that I'm working on. So for example, right now, I might come up here and right click and create a new sub-collection for, I don't know, what will we do? Sample research project. Very innovative. So now that I have this folder, what I end up doing is I go and find my sources, primary sources, secondary sources, and I dump them in the folder. And that's a good way to keep track of all the things you found and to sort of work with it from there. This is where the connector is really important. Let me show you what this can look like. So if you're going to, say, the Baylor University Library, and no thanks, chat, appreciate you, and you look for a book, say, I don't know, a book by a certain scholar named Daniel Watkins. And let's hope that Baylor actually has it. Oh, look at that, they do. So here you go. Here's my book. And Baylor has a copy of it. And you could put that in your Zotero library if you really wanted to. It's pretty easy to do it. So if you look up here at the top bar, you'll see a little icon that's connected with the Zotero plugin that I installed. If you click on the icon, it will show you kind of all the results from the catalog search that you just did. If you select one of those results, like I'm doing right now, and press OK, it will automatically import it into whatever folder is open on your Zotero library. So now if we go back to our Zotero library, boom, we'll see that it entered this book into your library. In the right panel, you'll see that it also collects lots of information about that book, the title, the author, an abstract sometimes, even sort of volume numbers, publication numbers, all sorts of things that you will need to cite that book later on. So this is a great way to organize your research because it keeps all these details together so that when you have to go about citing things and footnotes and endnotes and bibliographies, you'll have all that information. You won't have to look it up again. But Zotero gets even better, because attached to every sort of item in your library, you can insert a sort of note file, right? So you can click here and click add notes. And if you want to take notes on the book, this was a very good book. Great job, Dr. Watkins. Those notes will stay with that entry so that every time you click on the entry, the note file will be there. That's a great way to kind of keep all your notes organized and together with all the sources that you found. And if you happen to, say, find a digital copy of, say, an article or the primary source that you're looking at, or maybe even the book, you can attach it to the item too by coming up here and clicking on an attachment. I'll just attach any old thing here. And boom, it's there in the file together, all together in the same entry in Zotero. So see, this is why I like Zotero so much. It keeps everything organized. It's a great way to not lose sight of all the things you're finding when you're doing research. I highly, highly recommend that you download this and start using it for your research projects. And in fact, you can use it for any research project that you do from now on. Create multiple folders. Do it. So that's it. That's the research process in a nutshell. This is essentially the way that professional historians and academic historians go about doing their work, all the way, from the undergraduate level to professors of history. We all kind of do it the same way. And this is a good summary of what that looks like. Again, I want to emphasize that it might be a good idea to come back to this video later on down the semester to remind yourself of the whole process. Because as we go throughout the rest of the semester, we're going to kind of dig deep into each element of this process. And you might find yourself getting a little lost or having trouble seeing the kind of forest for the trees. So this video is designed to function as the kind of forest video, to give you a sense of where you are at all times. So feel free to come back and watch this again to remind yourself of where you are and what you need to be doing. Okay, I told you, it's a short one, so see you in class.